Hello and welcome to the Work Inspired podcast. I'm your host, George Lucas Pfeiffer. Clune Construction is a national general contractor that's employee-owned and has over 700 employees across 7 locations throughout the United States. Today, we're fortunate to have their CEO, Dave Hall, on the show to talk about the company, its culture, and his leadership style. A lot to learn. Work Inspired starts right now. Dave, thanks so much for being here. Excited to have you in person, to be on the show and learn more about Clune Construction.
Excited to be here.
The question I ask every guest to set the stage, tell your professional story. How'd you get to become the CEO of a major general contractor?
I am one of those people that just loves to build. My parents knew from an early age I'd end up in construction one way or the other. I'm that kid that would go around the house sites when they were building and pick up nails and things. It's kind of a disease, but it's me. I was a decent student, decent athlete, but I really liked building. That was what I loved to do. So it's illegal, I think, probably was then too, but I started in construction at 13.
Oh, wow.
I grew up in a little town in Michigan and helped out as laborer and then carpenter. Worked my way up to doing framing and then trim carpentry, and then went off to college and studied engineering. Found out pretty quickly that I love engineering in theory, but I'd rather do it with my hands. So after 3 years of engineering school, I switched to the construction management program. Cool. Graduated from Purdue, construction management degree. I wanted to learn a little bit about what our subcontractors, how they think. So my first job was actually for an electrical company out in Los Angeles, Berg Electric, a huge electrician. So I did estimating for them for a while. I ended up at Clune. We were then LaSalle, part of Jones Lang LaSalle. Kind of a mistake. I realized that the girl I'd been dating in college, someday I did want to marry, and she's a South Side Chicago girl, and she was not going to move to Los Angeles. So I quit my job, came back here, took a couple interviews, and I really liked the culture and the feel I got at what we were then LaSalle Construction, now Clune. So I came over as a project manager. That started it all. Yeah.
That's awesome.
Yep.
So is this now your wife? This girl that
you
went to Chicago for?
Yeah.
Okay.
Heather was 20 and I was 21 when we started dating. So
nice.
It's been over 30 years. Yep.
She's not in the industry, is she?
No, thank goodness. She's a school psychologist.
Oh, cool.
So she keeps me grounded.
It's funny when you say that you went to construction sites and took nails and stuff. I never thought about this, but as a kid, I would go to home building sites, and we'd take plywood and stuff out of the dumpsters, and we'd build furniture out of it. So I guess that was, maybe it's because
telling.
Very
telling, isn't it?
That's hilarious.
Yeah.
What sport were you? What kind of athlete?
Well, I was a skier and a swimmer.
Oh, wow.
Played soccer. I was decent, nothing great.
Yeah.
It's funny. It's where your passion is. I just would rather go frame houses. That was fun for me.
Yeah. You talked a little bit about what drew you to what was the LaSalle and then became Clune Construction. What was that? What's special about your company?
We used to say it was a work hard, play hard environment. Now I'd say it's more of a work hard, care hard environment. The people at Clune really, really, really do care about each other a lot. It's reflected through our ESOP now. Back then we didn't have an ESOP, but Mike cared. I made the mistake one time when I was a PM walking in. We had a lot going, so it was 5:30, 6 in the morning. And I walked right past his office, and he was already in his office. And next thing I knew, I see him coming down, and he says, "You don't say hi?" And that was the culture. Everybody, you know each other, you care about each other. When I started, we were 40 people. Now we're 800. So a little harder to know everybody at 800, but we do our best.
That's awesome. So you joined as a project manager.
I did.
What was the kind of the path internally that you took to CEO?
So started as a project manager doing tenant interiors work.
Okay.
When I was working on, I was doing 231 South LaSalle was the old Continental Bank building, and Bank of America had bought Continental Bank, and so we were one floor at a time redoing that whole building. So I was a project manager on a few floors, and then they had this new thing that they were doing. I had never heard of it before, called they were going to build a data center on the 21st floor. I was electrical engineering before I switched to construction management. So they said, let Dave do the data center. So I did, and I found it fascinating. I really enjoyed it. So I started chasing that type of work. And the Bank of America had an outage in their data center in San Francisco that same year. And so they called everybody together that worked in their facilities and said, hey, we're going to put in all these new processes and everything. So I was really lucky. I got to learn at that level. I got to learn when it was a new industry, and really understand what drives that industry. And I just fell in love with it.
Yeah.
So my path was, I became obviously senior project manager, then eventually a team leader, vice president. But I always focused on the more technical projects, and eventually was able to start a practice at Clune, just concentrating on data centers. How I got to CEO, I mean, I guess we'd probably have to ask Mike that because he had a lot of say in it. But we had 2001 was not good for a lot of us, right? But the data center work kept going. So more and more of our business became the critical facilities. So I oversaw that, and eventually then 2008, right, another recession. And I was the only person at Clune, only leader at Clune, that had people pounding on our door to give us work. Now it was out of state, right? But my wife and I looked at each other and said, well, you can travel or we can pay the mortgage. So let's do this. So my team and I all started traveling around the country. Part of traveling around the country is you learn how to work in obviously different places. Sure. And that was kind of the impetus for our expansion. Prior to that, we were only in Chicago and Los Angeles. A client, it was Digital Realty, asked us to go somewhere outside. It was in New Jersey. So we went to New Jersey, did good work. A year later, we're opening a New York office, right? Then they asked us to go to the San Antonio area first, but then we ended up in Dallas. A couple years later, opened a Dallas office. My way to CEO was just always figure out where the client wants us, do the best we can for them, build a great team, and eventually there's nowhere else for you to go, I guess.
Yeah. Well, also, when you join a company with 40 employees and you see the kind of growth that you've had,
right,
over that period of time, there's so much opportunity in that growth and in that
amazing
expansion. You talked about 2001 and 2008, and then we had 2020,
right,
and the pandemic,
right,
and the immersion of remote and then hybrid work. What's Clune Construction's current way of working? Are you in a hybrid world like most of us are? Or?
We are hybrid to a point. It's been loved by some people and disliked by others, but the board and I have refused to go fully hybrid. I mean, we build workplaces,
right,
and obviously when 2019, 2020 happened, our shift was amazing. We used to do about 70% workplace and 30% data centers. That switched.
Oh, wow.
Because nobody was building office space in 2020.
Yep.
But all this remote work caused, and artificial intelligence and all this other stuff caused a huge boom in the data center market. So we had to shift everybody over, which worked. It was great. But what we decided was our culture requires human interaction. That's part of the reason we all are here. We love this company. We're an ESOP. We care about each other. So for us, it was our superintendents have to be on site full time. So project managers can do a day a week working remote, but to show support for our field folks, 4 days a week, they're either in the office or on a job site. Sometimes more. I mean, they come in on Saturdays too and stuff. So
it's an interesting world because, like you, we create workspaces and places where people work. We strongly believe in their value.
Right.
But what came out of the pandemic was also the need for some flexibility. And you say a culture that cares. I'm sure sometimes people are like, well, to care about me, you need to let me work wherever I want to work. And it's interesting from a leadership perspective when you need to balance that with, but here's why it's important for the company for us to be together.
And it all has to do with, we are so centered on team success. We just feel that teams work really well together, work better together when they're in the same environment. And it works for us. Yeah. I'm sure it's not for everybody.
Transition that into the ESOP conversation. You've said it a couple times. We're also an ESOP company, employee ownership stock program, employee-owned company.
Yeah.
So having your employees have ownership in the company and act like owners, how does that translate into your culture? Or how do you communicate the value internally and externally of being an ESOP company?
Externally is hard. I think internally is kind of it just people get it.
Yeah.
But the whole story of going to ESOP, we are 100% employee owned, and we're heading to 100% ESOP. I think we're 67% ESOP right now.
Okay.
But that was always Mike Clune's plan. Was that he wanted every employee to feel like they own the company, and the reality was to do it with the number of employees we had was kind of impossible without doing an ESOP.
Right.
So in 2012, after a lot of back and forth, and we had minority partners. I was one of them. Was able to buy shares prior to us becoming ESOP and everything, but we realized it just wasn't at our scale, at our growth. It wasn't possible to really continue that. So we researched the ESOP, and in 2012, he sold 15% of the company to the ESOP. And then it's just every year gone more and more. And like I said, we're up to 67%.
That's awesome.
But how does it affect our clients? We're very team focused. We obviously recognize individual contribution, but we really celebrate teams and their successes. When I say celebrate, I mean we celebrate their successes. And that just naturally ties to employee ownership.
Yeah. One thing I admire, we do the interiors of spaces, and so do you. You know? And I think it's pretty cool to create something and then watch people work and live and play in it. With some of the large scale projects that you work on, how do you think about innovation? How do you think about staying ahead of the curve, or doing something new or unique, or even navigating change? There's inspiration, there's innovation in that. Talk a little bit about that. And is that something that you hire for, or that you train for, or that you cultivate somehow?
I'd say it's something we actually debrief for.
Oh, interesting.
So I don't know if you've ever had a chance. There's a author, I don't remember his actual first name, but he goes by call sign Cujo. He was a F-15. He was a Top Gun flight instructor, one of the best ones. And I think the record that they have in combat is like 168 to nothing. They've won. I mean, they're amazing performing teams. They have their pre-flight briefs. They have their mission, and then they have very heavy duty debriefs when they're done. And when they debrief, what they do is they debrief decisions, not outcomes. Because the reality is you can make all the right decisions and have a bad outcome. It can go either way. You can make all the right decisions and have a bad outcome. You can make all the wrong decisions and have a good one. So what I learned from that was we really try to, every project we do a debrief, really figure out what worked, what didn't work. Obviously, there's the decision piece, but then there's also the what got used in the space, what didn't get used, what could we have done differently. And what I found is most of our good ideas don't come from people my age. They come from free thinkers that are much younger than me. It's just a reality. So by including more of the junior team members in those discussions, first off, I mean, you get the little ideas when you're doing it. But some of these young people go and they'll have what I call them the shower ideas. The next day they're in the morning taking their shower and they come up with this great idea. And it seems like it's always spurred by those debriefs.
It's much easier to say that we should do what you're talking about than actually to do it. Right.
And we're not perfect about it. I have to be very,
because
we're getting better,
especially when you're busy, especially when you're growing like you guys are.
Right.
And it's always on to the next thing. Even celebrating your wins is sometimes hard to do.
It's very hard, but it's necessary.
It is. Yeah, I agree.
Absolutely necessary.
So are these debriefs, are they in the form of a structured meeting where you say, we're going to get the project team together?
We're getting better at them. Let me put it that way. If you read Cujo's book, I think it's called Debrief to Win or something like that. He has a very structured way of doing it. We weren't doing it and realized that a lot of information, a lot of lessons learned were getting lost. So we started with myself, Ben Walker, who is our COO, and then Deirdre Burke, who heads up our learning and development group, went around to every office, met with every team for 2 hours, and we called it our listening tour. And what we asked them to do is go through a project because we needed to start somewhere, right? So every one of those teams talked about one project in particular they thought was impactful. It could have been a good project, a bad project, but it was a project that they all worked together on. And we walked through from the very first, getting the RFP all the way through closeout, and talked about all the things that they did. And then the second half of the meeting was just kind of free flowing. And it was amazing, the things that we heard. It was a challenge for all of us. Ben's a little more quiet than me, but it was a big challenge for me to keep my mouth shut and listen. But the value we got out of that was amazing.
Yeah.
And what that did was made us realize that we have to do more of it. And what we're trying to do now is expand it. We haven't done it yet, but expand the team. Why are we not doing that with our subcontractors and our trade partners, our design teams? And then if we really get good at it, let's do it with our clients too. They could tell us great ideas that we could do differently. Yeah. And we're just not listening for them right now. So for me, it just starts with the listening and being intentional about it and scheduling that. Sounds boring.
No,
right?
but it sounds so obvious. Put it into practice and do it consistently. Yeah. That's tough.
Well, and again, I go back to, that's why I am so lucky to be leading a employee-owned company, right? Because we all know what we're talking about is the right thing to do. Listening is the right thing to do.
Right.
Continuous improvement is the right thing to do. But when you have if you're publicly traded and you have a deadline and if you don't hit this share price, people are going to lose their jobs, that changes things for you. Yeah. Where we as an employee-owned company, the reason for our being is, well, obviously to do great things for our clients, but also to build a great life and build wealth for our employees. Yeah. That's who I answer to. Yep. So I can make better long-term decisions, and listening is a great long-term decision.
I love that. Do you find that there's a certain amount of time, a window of time in which these meetings are more impactful? Because you wait too long and people forget, or it's too far, or it's too soon maybe, and you don't have enough information or data, or you don't have the right group of people around the table. It's interesting that you say the Cujo thing, because I just was watching this Masters of the Air or Sky or some show on Apple TV, and now I'm thinking about it. After every mission, they instantly went into a debrief, and they all sat around, and that's how they figured out like where people shot down, and like how did this plane get completely destroyed? Right. It's a cool tactic, but have you figured out any sort of like time threshold?
We're getting there.
Okay.
This has started in the last couple of years. We didn't do it before. My gut tells me that, like you're saying, it's pretty close to right at the end of the job. Yeah. But definitely, it's almost substantial completion. Yep. You don't want to be wrapped up and done. Yeah. The only obvious exception to that is one of the things that we all know in the construction industry: punch lists drag on and on. So you kind of want to have some insight in how you did with that.
Let's talk about your team some more. Are you guys growing by acquisition, or are you guys growing like when you talked about going to New York and following your client into Texas? Are you starting a space there and then hiring new people?
We're definitely not opposed to acquisition. It hasn't worked out real well for us to this point. Okay. We did acquire the old Jones Lang LaSalle construction office in San Francisco, and that's how we started there. The sad part was the culture didn't line up, and I think within a year, all the employees were gone. We had people from within that grew into those roles. And San Francisco is doing great now, but it wasn't a great move for us. I mean, it was we pretty much didn't pay anything for it, so it worked out. Yeah. But we also acquired JLL's office in Virginia. Okay, and that worked a little better. Okay, right. We still have some great employees from that acquisition. But that's about it. I mean, our expansion to Dallas, we now have, I think, 70 people in Dallas. And that's only been the last 6 years. And that was, I asked a couple individuals who were sitting in Chicago, and they hit a kind of a glass ceiling. They were doing nothing wrong, and they had great leadership potential, but there wasn't an available spot for them, right? So I asked them, would you be interested in moving to Dallas? Steve Loeb said yes. So Steve moved down there, and we were doing work for Equinix, one of our big data center clients. We had continuous work, and just, the trick we found, I don't want to give away our company secrets, but is start internally and then hire locally. There's cultural differences in different places. And, if you're in Dallas and all your employees have a Southside Chicago draw, you're not trusted as much as you would be if you have a true Texan there.
Believe me, one of my friends moved to Houston, and he grew up with me
Yeah.
here in Chicago, and he now sounds like a Texan.
Yep.
It's probably going to be your.
Well, Steve Lopes has a cowboy hat and wears boots,
Yeah, exactly.
and he loves it. And his wife is from the South, and so it worked out great for them. But so that's been, most recent expansion was Phoenix. Again, Adam Ojak, Jeremy Stanek, two great guys that wanted to go farther, and it was an opportunity. And we had clients in Phoenix that wanted us to work there.
Nice.
And it's been a great success story. So
it sounds like if the question is what's your approach to team building and people leadership, part of that is find the people with potential within your company and give them opportunity to grow. Right. Yeah.
And we have had some very successful hires from outside. Kevin is one of the guys that helps run our Texas office and is fantastic. Kevin Morrison. He came from outside and from a subcontractor. So we do that, obviously. But yeah, it's significant. I think if you look at the MD level of our company, it's more than half started as interns.
Wow.
It's crazy. So yes, there's definitely a promote from within culture, supplemented by great outside hires. Yeah.
And I think that's a testament to your culture, because it's not common to have someone at intern level stay at an organization that long. It's the opposite's true. Actually.
It's crazy. We give out annual meeting. We give out 30-year tenure awards. I've been here 28. It all goes back to, I don't want to smoke or anything, but Mike Clune, he created the culture with help from others. There was a group that helped him implement that. A headhunter recently said, "I've given up on trying to steal people from Clune."
That's
I'm like, well, hey, that's great.
Yeah, that's awesome. Well, and then from a leadership perspective, it sounds, you've mentioned Mike a number of times. It sounds like the approach to culture and leadership is the top-down approach, where you're going to set an example. And you're going to lead the way that you expect the other owners, which are your employees.
Yeah. Well,
set the example.
I would say yes and no. I you can't see it on camera, but this is our org chart. It's upside down triangle.
Oh, there you go. Yeah.
I'm at the bottom. Actually, the board technically is the bottom, but there's a management guru that I really like. His name's Eric Coryell. He's actually out of Wisconsin somewhere. Kind of soft-spoken guy, but he has some amazing ideas. And when you really think about an org chart that's top down, where are you looking? You're looking up at your boss. You're not looking at the customer. You're not looking at the client. And by a bottom-up approach, what I like to call it, we call it the all eyes up. My job is to support the people above me, and their job is to support the people above them. And then you get to this project managers and superintendents. What is their job? Their job is to support the customer, the client. Not to look and make sure the person above them is watching out for them. So I'm very lucky that Mike set the culture that way. It's a culture of support. And at Clune, we're not perfect, but we know at Clune that your leader supports you. I know the board supports me, and I sure hope everybody else knows I support them.
And I think that's a much better way to frame it than top down. The culture, the heart of your company starts there and emulates outward. Right. Yeah. That's cool.
And it's all because, hey, none of us have a job if we don't have good customers.
That's true. Yeah.
And if our project managers and our even our BD people and everybody accountants aren't concentrating on the needs of our customers, we're all going to be out of a job eventually.
Let's talk about that for a second. Let's talk about customer experience.
Okay.
So let's start there, and then maybe pull it back into employee experience.
Okay.
And see where there's some overlaps or differences. But I set the stage. Who's your customer?
Our customers are, on the tenant interiors market, there's definitely customers that are the people that we build for. But I think it goes beyond that. It's anybody you have a relationship with where your success and their success are tied, in my mind. So it's the design community, right? It's our trade partners. For years we called our trade partners subcontractors. We don't self-perform much work. Without our trade partners, we're nobody. So in a way, our customers are our trade partners. And we're their customer too. But we do business with them. They ensure our success. We're all married to the same great outcome. We have success together.
So obviously creating a project with minimal punch that's delivered on time, on budget,
right? The
end result, the quality product, that's one way to create a customer experience, and is important.
And our repeat business is it's somewhere around 80%.
Nice.
Because of that.
Is there another layer to it though that's how people feel when they're interacting with
Yes.
a Clune Construction employee.
Absolutely. Anybody that thinks that you can have a construction project without problems and issues,
Right.
They're going to be woken up. It's not, that doesn't work,
Mm-hmm.
right? For us, it's all about how Blake Brazier was a superintendent we had for years. Many people that built around Chicago know him. One of our top general superintendents. He'd always talk about everybody's got to get in the lifeboat together.
Mm-hmm.
And that was the way I was taught to run projects as a project manager. Get the customer in the boat with you so they understand that it's your intention to solve their problems,
Right.
work things out together, that engagement piece, focus on pre-construction. You plan the job right, things go well.
Mm-hmm.
You get that way you're listening to your subcontractors when you have scope reviews. You understand what their needs are, what their challenges are, what their ideas are.
Mm-hmm.
And then you're able to deliver that even better product to the client. We invite our clients to sit through all of our scope reviews, which I know isn't super common. I think it's done quite a bit around here in Chicago, but it's not common across the country. We found that out as we expanded. We're all in the lifeboat together, and the other part of that is it just builds an amazing, it's fun.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know how else to say it. It's just fun.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
So.
I agree. And to be honest, as you look at, you talked about your data centers and AI and some of the disruption coming in the technical space, one of the things that I think is somewhat, unique about our industry is that unlike e-commerce or some industries where the relationship isn't as important,
Right.
ours it is because of the complexity and because of the problems that are fairly common in these large scale projects, right? And so working together to solve some of those issues or looking for opportunities to do better together, you're right. It's collaboration and it's teamwork.
So you have to think differently.
And in those ways, you talk about being in the lifeboat together.
Yeah.
Is that the same approach you take to employee experience?
Oh,
maybe it's
absolutely.
not a lifeboat so much internally. Maybe it's a jet plane to Cujo's. We're in this together. We got to be rowing in the same direction.
Well, and that makes it easy.
Yeah.
The ESOP piece makes that a little bit easier,
Yeah.
right? I hope our employees feel that they're cared for as much as they are.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, we try to show it. We have best-in-class benefits. We have everything. Why wouldn't we? We're an ESOP.
Right.
It's our job to take care of our employees. That is my job.
Yep.
To make sure that their welfare and their well-being and eventually, hopefully, their wealth is in a good spot. What we have found also, kind of with the upside-down triangle as a org chart, is that high-performing teams, and this goes back to my favorite guru, Eric Coryell, my favorite cheesehead guru. A high-performing team, everybody holds each other accountable. Mm-hmm. The leader really doesn't have to do as much of that, right? Mm-hmm. And if you think back to what, I'm sure I don't know what sports you played, but, or if it was on a construction site or anything, if you think back to what was your favorite experience in a sport or at work, it wasn't the easiest job you had, right? Mm-hmm. And sometimes whether you won or lost in sports doesn't even matter.
Right.
It was that interaction with your teammates. Mm-hmm. And so we work really, really hard to teach that, where our teams hold each other accountable, but also celebrate together. Mm-hmm. So we facilitate that the best we can.
I've talked about this before on the show, but a great example, I think, of what you've been illustrating is in cycling. I've kind of gotten into cycling recently, and Tour de France is coming up this week. It seems like it can be such an individual sport, but the teams are so intertwined and serving each other and playing off of each other. And even, you mentioned your competition, there's a lot of that too.
Right.
And I've made the analogy of why that's why it's important to come back into the workplace and be together.
Yep.
Is because if you're around others, like you are in a peloton,
Yeah.
you'll go faster and farther. And if you're isolated out on your own, like you might be in a breakaway, that peloton's going to catch you and overwhelm you at some point.
Right.
Unless you're real lucky and you timed it right. So I think everything that you've said makes so much sense. And I really appreciate you giving us a peek into your culture, because clearly with the employee tenure that you have had, and the client retention that you've had, and the growth that you've had, you guys are doing a lot right. So a lot we can learn from Clune Construction.
We're doing a lot right. Yeah. We're not perfect. For me, it's all about that continuous improvement piece. Mm-hmm. What got us here won't get us there. Yeah, that's the reality. Yeah, changes are the only constant in the world, right? Yeah. So to stay ahead of it. We don't judge ourselves against our competition. I mean, yeah, it's great. We keep moving up in E&R. In fact, we just won the E&R Midwest Contractor of the Year and things like that. But that's great, and you need to celebrate those achievements. But it's really about the well-being of our employees. So it's just different.
What's the forecast? 70-30 switch now to 70% data centers. Is that actually the future? Is it, or are you seeing it level out a little bit more?
We love. I mean, we started doing tenant interiors, and that's what built our company. And I'm convinced that if you can do high-end TI work, you can build anything. And I'm sure there's somebody to listen to this and say, well, then you don't know anything about chilled piers, But the reality is, I mean, the complexity of working in a high-rise, dealing with hoisting, dealing with the multiple subs, people on top of each other, all that stuff, then the details, the coordination, the level of quality that's expected on high-end tenant interiors work. If you can do that, you can do anything. I always thought data centers were a little bit easier. Yes, more impactful if something goes wrong. I get that. But the reality is it's so tied to our core that we sure hope that we never have to give up tenant interiors. Yeah. The reality is right now, I mean, the data center market, especially here in Elk Grove, is insane. It's very strong in Virginia. It's very strong in Texas. It's very strong in Phoenix. Will the shift continue? The shift will go where it'll go. Yeah. Our concentration is making sure that we keep our employees working and happy and excited and on great teams. Cool. Yeah.
Well, I also hope that you continue to do lots of tenant interior work. A couple final questions, and these can be more personal or professional, however you feel. But you've already given some great, I think, resource advice. But we ask each guest to say what's been a resource that has been valuable to you in your career that you could recommend to others.
I have to say I was not impressed with content available to. That's available to a lot of the project management and superintendent operations folks in construction. So we created our own. I mean, there's some stuff that FMI does that's helpful. But what we had to create our own learning and development department. We create our own online tools. It's just what we do. I haven't found a really good resource for our operations folks. Now, when you talk about leadership development, that I'd say there's a lot of good stuff out there. One thing I did when before becoming CEO, I was made president of Chicago, and I realized I didn't know anything about being a president. Right? We don't learn in engineering school or in construction school about leadership. You learn about building stuff. Yeah. So I joined a group called Vistage. I don't know if you've heard of Vistage, but so I've been a member of Vistage for the last 5 years, and I found some great resources there. And it also forces you once a month to put a day aside to really concentrate on yourself and your leadership. And so I think that's great. It also forces you to be a forever learner because, you can't be stagnant in leadership. Right. But as far as actual people, I wrote down some names here. Really starting out to become a great leader, you got to be vulnerable. And so Brene Brown writes about vulnerability and speaks about vulnerability. And I've learned a lot from her. Simon Sinek, Start With Why, I think is a great book. It gets you, again, kind of starting your leadership, understanding that it's so important. Everybody loves Jim Collins, Good to Great. That's a great book that we use a lot, especially with the continuous improvement piece of what he describes, and not concentrating on your competition, but concentrating on yourself and attacking the market. I love Patrick Lencioni when he talks about humble, hungry, and smart. He writes some wacky books. I love that stuff. It's pretty funny. I mentioned Eric Coryell and his descriptions of high-performing teams. I hope Eric doesn't hear this and get offended, but his book's a little weak, but I think he even says that, so it's okay. He's a great presenter. He does great work with teams. I love his message. And then I talked about Cujo. Yeah. For me, that's the process, and it goes over and over again. Vulnerable, why, humble, hungry, smart, high performing teams, and then debrief, and then start over. And so I've read
cycle of success.
Yeah, I've read those books a number of times, and I'm sure somebody else will come out with a different take on it that I'll like. I hope so.
Yeah. I like that. That's great.
Yeah.
Those are great recommendations.
Yeah.
And a couple I would need to check out. Most I'm familiar with, but I'm definitely looking up Cujo.
And I bet a lot of people look up, anybody hears this will look up Eric Coryell. He's a great guy. He travels down, if you're from Chicago, he travels down here quite often. But yeah, Vistage has been huge help for me. You know, the way I managed, the way I led early in my career. And I've said this too. We invest extremely heavily. I didn't really mention that on leadership development. So anybody that makes it to an officer at Clune, which is the lowest level officer, is a vice president, and we have about 100 of them, gets enrolled in a 2-year Vistage Inside program.
Wow.
Where we fly everybody in. It's usually groups of up to 16 people at a time. They learn about leadership development because, again, most of us come from engineering, architecture, or the trades.
Yeah.
The way I was taught, I was motivated as a young person was to not get hit, basically.
Right,
I mean,
right.
that's just, I'm a child of the 70s, right? That was the way we were motivated. And that just doesn't work. Well, it might work to a certain level, but if you really want a high-performing team, it doesn't work.
Right.
So we invest a tremendous amount of time, money, and energy in helping our leaders because it's not intuitive for most of us. You know, unless you're just out of the womb extremely emotionally intelligent, which I was not. I realized I needed help, and then I had to realize, okay, well, if I expect others to be high-performing leaders, they need it too.
Yeah. It's great advice. What's something you're looking forward to in the next 12 months?
You know, constant improvement. Our L&D offerings are getting better and better. I mentioned, a year and a half ago, 2 years ago is when we started the listening tour. You know, we pulled some high-functioning, high-performing people out of operations, which we'd never done before, strictly to have them be involved with continuous improvement. And that I'm really excited about. When you're a small company, you can't afford to do those things. We have 800 employees. I can afford to pull a few out. So we've got a new senior vice president of process and quality, Andy Hollab, who is helping me with this. I'm still very involved in it just because I'm so passionate about it. Sure. Ben Walker, our COO, is involved with it to a point, but man, he's just trying to keep the trains running, keep everybody on the right track. So it's mostly Andy and I, and then tied with our head of learning and development, Deirdre Burke. Yeah. So create the content, teach the content, make the content available. We're not a construction company that owns a whole bunch of equipment. Yeah. Right? We don't own really much of any. It's about our people.
And what a cool position to be in as the CEO too, being involved in that.
Yes.
And that, because that really, given your upside down triangle, that's your job, right?
Yep.
It's cool. I like it.
And it's fun. Yeah. I love my job. And if I wasn't able to, I see some CEOs, like I say, I sit in Vistage meetings and I see some CEOs that have, what they have to do every day is pretty negative. Constantly dealing with human resources issues or legal stuff and things like that. And of course I have to do that. It's part of my job. But I think if you want to lead a high performing company, you have to be positive. And this stuff drives me. It's fun.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
I hate to ask this because I feel like you've already given plenty of advice, but
sure.
I always finish the conversation with, if you're retiring tomorrow,
right,
what's some advice you're going to leave for your team as it relates to leadership or success?
Well, first one, and this was the hardest one for me, was vulnerability. When you don't know something, you have to say it. When you need help, you have to ask for it, especially in construction. I did not make it to be a team leader and head of the mission critical practice by being a super nice guy. And in some ways, I'm embarrassed about that. That was the way things were done, but it doesn't make it right. And especially as a employee-owned company, 100% employee-owned. I was telling the story of to one of our Vistage Inside groups, and I got very vulnerable with them. And I said, I want to tell you about one of the worst mistakes I ever made. We were doing a data center in Sterling, Virginia, and it wasn't going real well. And this was for Digital Realty Trust. It was one of my top clients. I cared very deeply about that relationship. And instead of being vulnerable and being approachable, I did things the way I had learned. I screamed, I yelled, I insulted, and it didn't help the job at all, right? That damaged my relationship with the two guys that run that office, Tony and Mike. We've cleared it up. I've apologized. And now Tony and Mike trust me. And if something's going wrong, they don't back off. They tell me quickly, right? And then what do I do with it? It's an what do they call it? Autopsy without blame is what Lencioni or Jim Collins, I think it was Jim Collins, talked about. Let's not blame anybody. How do we get out of this, right? And usually I've found that there's a pretty easy way to get out of it if you know about it pretty quickly. Right.
If those defense walls aren't up,
right,
you can figure out a way through much quicker.
But if I'm not vulnerable, they're not going to be either.
Yeah.
Especially because I've got a title that they don't have.
Yeah.
I'm their boss.
Yeah.
That is to me, that to me has been just amazingly helpful in my career. And I love to see it. I love to see when we put all the officer teams through Vistage training, they're demanding it of the more senior level people. And I love seeing that. So I can encourage it from the top. They're demanding it from their leaders. And obviously the leadership, the senior leadership is like, okay, we get it. We get it.
So vulnerability is a strength through which to grow, not a weakness through which to hide.
Exactly.
And also, it's not too late to become vulnerable.
It never is.
Yeah. So you can go back and repair past damage done by being vulnerable today or in the future.
Yep.
Cool. Well, Dave, amazing advice. Really great insight. Thank you so much for being here.
Oh, thanks for having me.
Really appreciate it.
I do too.
Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed this conversation, please take a moment to rate our show. If you haven't already, be sure to subscribe to the Work Inspired podcast so that you don't miss any of the incredible guests we have planned for upcoming episodes. We'll continue to find the best and brightest minds in business so that you can learn, grow, and succeed, and so that we can all work inspired. Work Inspired is brought to you by BOS, a leader in commercial working environments and a Hayworth best-in-class dealership. Experience our 360 approach and discover the team, tools, and techniques required to navigate the complexity of your next workspace at BOS.com. If you have ideas, feedback, or would like to be featured on our show, please email podcast@BOS.com. Thank you for listening. This has been a Workspace digital production. If you're interested in launching a podcast at your organization, please email info@workspace.digital for a free consultation.